All right, everyone, buckle up, because we're diving deep today into the Vietnam War.
But not your typical history lesson.
Right. Forget the timelines and the dry facts.
We're focusing on a specific period, 1964 to 68,
Using a really unique lens.
a draft historical fiction novel called The Brides of War.
And it's fascinating how this novel weaves together the personal stories with, like, military tactics, the social upheavals of the time, even the media's role.
It gives you these really intimate glimpses into how the war touched every aspect of life.
Exactly. We'll be uncovering the human stories behind those big headlines, and seeing how events connect in ways you might not expect. So to kick things off, picture this. Mary Washington College, 1968. It's a small conservative women's college.
Near Quantico Marine Base.
And you've got this pressure cooker of conservative values clashing head-on with a growing counterculture, especially when it comes to Vietnam.
And yeah, that proximity to Quantico, it made the war intensely personal for many students.
Totally. So many had boyfriends, brothers, even fathers training or fighting over there.
It's like the nation's anxieties were focused onto this one campus.
Right. And we're introduced to Emily, a student whose life basically revolves around her fiancé, Jack Hunt, a Marine in training at Quantico.
And the novel takes us on Jack's journey from the basic school all the way to his arrival in Da Nang, Vietnam.
And it really captures that jarring transition from, like, training exercises to the chaotic reality of war.
Yeah.
There's this one detail that stuck with me. Marines were actually flown into Vietnam on commercial airlines.
Can you imagine?
Right, like flight attendants handing out peanuts and warning about potential mortar fire.
It's such a striking juxtaposition, and that sense of disorientation, it doesn't stop there.
Oh, tell me about it.
When Jack arrives in Da Nang, the novel describes the terminal as like this really shoddily built structure, indifferent staff.
Nothing like the patriotic send-off he probably imagines. Like, the war just immediately strips away any illusions.
Absolutely.
And as Jack's grappling with this harsh new reality, he's also trying desperately to maintain his connection with Emily back home.
Their letters become this really fragile lifeline.
Strained by the distance and the constant threat of danger.
And their story, it really highlights a broader point about the Vietnam War. Unlike previous conflicts where, victory seemed clear-cut, Vietnam was morally ambiguous.
Right.
The enemy wasn't easily identifiable. The objectives were constantly shifting.
And the body count strategy, as we'll get into, was deeply flawed.
Yeah, we'll definitely dive into that.
Okay, so let's talk about that body count.
Yeah.
The U.S. military was completely obsessed with it, believing that if they just killed enough enemy soldiers, they'd eventually win.
Yeah.
But the novel, through Jack's experiences, shows how that approach backfired spectacularly.
Yeah, the body count strategy, it really stemmed from a fundamental misunderstanding of the enemy's motivations.
In what way?
The North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong, they were fighting for their homeland, Driven by ideology, they were willing to endure incredible losses.
And the focus on just racking up enemy casualties led to a disregard for civilian lives?
Absolutely. Search and destroy missions, all aimed at getting those high body counts, often resulted in widespread destruction, and, well, they alienated the South Vietnamese population.
It's crazy how, instead of breaking the enemy's will, it actually fueled the insurgency.
Yeah, it turned villagers against the U.S. presence.
Eroded the morale of American troops.
Who were forced to measure success in the most dehumanizing way.
It's chilling to think about the psychological toll of that.
For sure.
But you know what else is fascinating? The novel introduces us to this iconic symbol of the Vietnam War, the Huey helicopter.
Ah, the Huey, such a game changer.
It completely revolutionized warfare in Vietnam's incredibly challenging terrain, right? Dense jungles, mountains, rice paddies.
All these obstacles that traditional ground forces really struggled with.
But the Huey, with its ability to transport troops rapidly, provide close air support, even act as a gunship.
It changed everything.
It's crazy how one piece of technology can have such a massive impact on warfare. And the concept of vertical assault, it's mind-boggling. Instead of slogging through the jungle, you could be swiftly inserted right into a combat zone by helicopter.
Right into the thick of it.
It gave the U.S. a definite tactical advantage.
But it also exposed troops to a whole new set of dangers.
For sure.
Hueys were very vulnerable to enemy fire.
Oh, yeah.
And crashes were a constant threat. The novel really captures that duality.
The Huey as both a lifeline and a potential death trap.
Exactly. And that duality, it extends to like the whole American experience in Vietnam, you know?
No, totally.
On one hand, you have this technological superiority, this belief in military might.
Right.
And on the other, you have the harsh realities of guerrilla warfare, the moral ambiguities.
The psychological toll on the soldiers.
Exactly.
Speaking of psychological toll, the novel doesn't shy away from the brutality of war. There's this one scene where Jack witnesses his commanding officer, Captain Goodloe, doing something really disturbing.
Oh, yeah, Goodloe. He actually displays the bodies of Chinese soldiers as a warning.
Whoa.
It's meant to instill fear in the local Vietnamese population.
Intense.
But, as the novel suggests, it probably had the opposite effect.
Right. Alienated the very people they were trying to win over.
Yeah.
Seems like a clear example of how cultural misunderstandings and just brute force can backfire in a conflict like Vietnam.
For sure.
And this incident, it really affects Jack. He's horrified at first.
Of course.
But as the war grinds on, he starts to question everything.
The mission, the tactics.
His own role in it all.
Absolutely.
That internal struggle must have been so intense, especially for someone like Jack, who went into the war with such a strong sense of patriotism and duty.
You can only imagine.
And his disillusionment, it kind of reflects a broader trend among American soldiers in Vietnam.
Definitely. As the war dragged on and the body bags piled up,
Yeah.
a lot of them began to question the validity of the mission, the true cost of those victories, measured in body counts.
Heavy stuff. And meanwhile, back home, the anti-war movement was gaining serious momentum. And the novel introduces us to Sarah, a student at Mary Washington, who really embodies this growing dissent.
Oh, Sarah. She's actively involved with the Students for a Democratic Society.
The SDS.
Right.
Her story provides such a fascinating counterpoint to Jack's, right? While he's fighting in the jungles, she's on campus, organizing protests, participating in teach-ins, challenging the government's narrative.
Two sides of the same coin.
And it's interesting how the novel connects their experiences. Sarah ends up dating a guy from her hometown, Daniel, who also gets deployed to Vietnam. Adds a whole new layer of complexity to her activism, right?
Suddenly it becomes personal.
Exactly. She's still opposed to the war.
But now she has someone she loves fighting in it.
It's like, how can you reconcile those two things?
It's a real dilemma. The novel describes her receiving a cassette tape from Daniel.
Oh, wow.
And it's heartbreaking. He talks about the horrors he's seen, the futility of the fighting.
What else?
He even compares the war to the myth of Sisyphus, that endless, pointless struggle.
Wow.
You can tell he's deeply disillusioned.
It's like the novel's using these personal stories to highlight the moral ambiguity of the war. You know, the idea that there weren't any easy answers or clear-cut victories.
Absolutely. It challenges the whole narrative.
Right. And that sense of moral ambiguity, it's further emphasized through the story of Michael Draper, another student at Mary Washington.
Michael, yeah, he's from a wealthy family, went to Yale.
Privileged.
And despite his initial reservations about the war, he enlists in the Marines.
It's like he represents those complexities of class and privilege during that era.
For sure.
He could have easily avoided the draft.
Right.
But he chooses to serve. Maybe out of a sense of duty, maybe a desire to prove himself.
It's a fascinating dynamic.
Right.
And his story takes a dramatic turn when he's captured.
Oh, no.
And becomes a prisoner of war, held in the infamous Hanoi Hilton.
The Hanoi Hilton. Just the name sends chills down my spine.
I know, right?
The novel really goes into detail about the horrific conditions those POWs endured, the torture, the isolation.
A true living hell.
And Michael's experience there, it really underscores the enduring human cost of war, you know. Those physical and psychological scars that linger long after the fighting ends. And his story also brings in the racial dynamics of the time.
Right, he's involved with Michelle.
An African-American student at Mary Washington.
Their relationship would have been incredibly challenging back then, facing prejudice within the military and in society at large.
Absolutely. And Michelle's story, it adds another layer to the Vietnam War experience. The novel shows how she navigates this predominantly white institution, dealing with microaggressions, that feeling of isolation.
Tough situation.
And it's a reminder that the fight for civil rights, it was happening alongside the war in Vietnam.
Two battles at once.
And for many African Americans, it felt like fighting on two fronts, right? The war overseas and the war for equality at home.
Exactly. And Michelle's father, a blue-collar worker from Ohio, he voices these concerns directly.
What does he say?
He's worried about Michael, not just because he's a soldier, but because he's a white man in a relationship with his black daughter.
Powerful stuff.
It's a reminder that love even in the most challenging circumstances, doesn't exist in a vacuum.
It's shaped by those social and political realities.
Absolutely.
And speaking of love and relationships, the novel also explores the evolving dynamic between Emily, Jack's fiancée, and Sarah, the anti-war activist.
Yeah, it's interesting how, despite their totally different views on the war, they develop this complex friendship,
They challenge each other's perspectives.
offer support and understanding even when they disagree.
It's a powerful example of how human connection can transcend political divides, especially in times of crisis, right?
It really is.
It's a reminder that empathy and compassion are so essential, even when we're grappling with these deeply contentious issues.
Could not agree more. And that sense of empathy, it's further emphasized through the story of Rachel, the aspiring journalist we mentioned earlier.
Right.
She's the one who observes the anti-war protests with Tom Crow, who's now her boyfriend.
The Marine, yeah. Rachel's story, it kind of represents the power of storytelling, the need to bear witness to both the horrors and the humanity of war.
Exactly. She becomes a bridge between the battlefield and the home front.
And her relationship with Tom, who later enlists and is severely injured in Vietnam, it gives her this firsthand look at the war's devastating consequences.
That's personal for her.
Totally. It's like she uses her journalism to shed light on the human costs of the conflict.
The stories that might otherwise be overlooked.
Exactly. And in doing so, she kind of embodies a key theme of the novel,
Which is,
the importance of seeking truth.
even when it's uncomfortable, even when it challenges our preconceived notions.
It makes me think back to what we discussed earlier about the flawed logic of the body count strategy.
Right, that obsession with quantifiable metrics,
They lost sight of the bigger picture.
the human cost, the real complexities of the conflict,
It's a cautionary tale.
about the dangers of oversimplification.
Reducing these complex issues to statistics.
The Vietnam War, as the novel shows so vividly, was a messy, multifaceted conflict.
No easy answers.
And its legacies continue to shape how we understand war and its impact on individuals and societies. And it's not just the battlefield, The Brides of War also explores how the war really impacted the home front,
Families, relationships,
the whole social fabric of America.
like these ripple effects reaching every corner of life.
Exactly.
Remember Emily, Jack's fiancée?
Oh, absolutely.
The novel shows how she copes with that constant anxiety, waiting for news, fearing that each letter from Jack could be the last.
It's a powerful look at the emotional strain on those left behind.
Yeah.
How war can just consume your thoughts, dominate your existence.
And it's not just the fear, right?
No.
Emily also experiences this real sense of isolation.
Like, her friends and classmates can't truly grasp what she's going through.
Like she's living in this weird in-between space, trying to maintain normalcy while part of her is always on edge.
Waiting for that dreaded telegram.
Right, exactly. And whose story also reveals the societal pressures women faced back then.
Totally.
Emily's expected to be supportive, put on a brave face, embody that ideal of the dutiful military wife.
But underneath, she's wrestling with doubts, fears, resentment.
It's interesting how the novel uses her experience to explore those changing roles of women in the 60s.
Absolutely.
Traditional expectations clashing with the emerging feminist movement.
And the war just amplifies those tensions.
For sure. And this theme of societal change, it's evident in Sarah's story, too.
The anti-war activist.
Right. Remember, she falls for Daniel, the soldier who becomes so disillusioned.
Oh, yeah, their relationship is so complex.
It forces Sarah to confront the human cost of her beliefs, right?
To see the war as something deeply affecting someone she cares about.
Not just an abstract political issue.
It challenges her whole view of soldiers.
Totally. At first, she sees them as tools of the government.
Cogs in a war machine.
But through Daniel, she starts to understand their humanity, their struggles, their sacrifices.
Her activism evolves. It becomes more about compassion.
Recognizing the complexity, the human stories on all sides.
And that shift, it doesn't weaken her commitment to peace.
It strengthens it.
It fuels her determination to work for a better world.
Right. And this brings us to a crucial point about Vietnam. It wasn't just a conflict between nations.
It divided Americans at home.
Families, friends, communities, torn apart by differing views.
And the novel captures that through Emily and Sarah.
So well.
Despite their contrasting views, they manage to stay friends.
It's a testament to their shared humanity.
Their willingness to see beyond those political differences.
It's a powerful message, especially now,
When political polarization is so intense.
The novel reminds us that even in times of deep division, empathy, understanding, dialogue, those are essential.
Couldn't agree more.
And that message, It's echoed through Rachel, the aspiring journalist,
Right. She falls for Tom Crow, the Marine.
who we saw at the protest earlier. It's almost like the novel's using their relationship to symbolize bridging that divide.
Between those who supported the war and those who opposed it.
Exactly. And Rachel's role as a journalist, it lets her explore the war from so many angles.
She interviews everyone, soldiers, activists, families,
Always seeking truth, even when it's tough.
even when it challenges her own biases.
It's like she embodies the importance of seeking understanding, listening to those different viewpoints.
Using storytelling to illuminate the human experience of war.
Powerful stuff. This deep dive has been incredible. We've covered so much.
The body count strategy, the Huey helicopter, the personal stories, the lasting scars of war, the social tensions.
The power of empathy to bridge divides.
It's all woven together so skillfully in The Brides of War.
The novel really reminds us that history is about people.
Their choices, their struggles.
By delving into those personal narratives, we get a deeper appreciation for the complexities of the past and the legacies of war.
Powerful stuff.
As we wrap up, I'm left with this profound sense of Vietnam's impact, not just on those who lived through it.
But on American society as a whole?
It's a story that still resonates, urging us to grapple with the complexities of war, to honor the sacrifices, and to really strive for a more peaceful world.
A reminder that the quest for understanding never ends.
And as we explore the past, we learn lessons that can guide us.
In the present and the future.
So well said. Thank you all for joining us on this incredible deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking those deeper understandings.